Soosology, we've signed up with Barbecue. We're going to raise some money for cancer research, and we thought we'll invite you guys along. Come along for a barbecue.
Yep.
Meet us all.
That's it.
Yep.
And as a thank you, if anyone is donating
Over 20 bucks.
20 bucks,
Yep.
we'll invite you out to the Soosology network here, and you can see how this is all done. See this area. See this great man cave.
The studio. The studio.
The Gunners Club on the
15th of March.
In the west of Melbourne, so sorry.
But we're worth it.
Maybe we are, but cancer's a really good cause.
That's it.
Raising money for cancer, that's a good cause. So over $20 donations will get a private invitation.
And you get a free barbecue.
And
a
you get your barbecue. But
everyone always feels good when they donate a little bit something, and make sure it's your good deed.
And we'll have a cold one with you.
Cheers.
Welcome back to Soosology. You're here with Gunner and with Dixie.
Hey.
Now, Paul Hogan was recently back in town and they were showing the new version of Crocodile Dundee. When I say the new version, well, it's light up by a few scenes.
Songs?
No, by a few scenes. So if you're used to the old version, you might remember some occasions in it, such as him being in a nightclub and being gender curious. Well, it's been decided that humour has changed, society has changed, and we're not broad-minded enough to watch scenes like that. When the film was recently recut for England, they also took away, I think, one of the biggest gags from the movie. You might remember That's Not a Knife.
And your wallet.
Nick, give him your wallet.
What for?
He's got a knife.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
That's a knife. Gone in the version shown recently in Britain. So maybe it's just that us Australians are a bit too uncouth for the rest of the world. Maybe times really have changed. But Dixie, we've had a bit of fun, haven't we? Eating chips, farting into the couch, watching Australian films. What thing?
It was a lack of shame, really. And I reckon, what we call a larrikin spirit doesn't really translate. If you look up the word larrikin, you'll see something coarse, offensive, whereas that's not what a larrikin is. A larrikin in Australia, like your ginger megs, would be like a dog that gets up, sniffs the wind, and just wants to look for adventure, right? He'll jump fences, he won't care if he'll trample them while he jumps them, and he'll have, just like an Australian comedian, this zany look in his eyes, which is almost like a dog performing a play bow in front of another to say, now, you know how this is going to play out, but just watch it. Everybody loves the story. I'll play it out for you now.
So he's always a Pied Piper for mischief.
Oh, you know what happens if you don't pay the piper?
That's right. I've been watching a few films recently, and I think going back to the early start of Australian humour, stuff like Nina Colada in They're a Weird Mob. Mm-hmm. Now, what struck me about that film was the opening a scene, they have to show a globe of the earth to show the world where Australians actually live. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the opening scenes are to tell people who we believe, who we are. And I think that's a common theme through Australian movies, particularly those which were exporting to the world. Crocodile Dundee. The film did well because it was set in a micro environment, and that environment was basically the pub of Walkabout Creek in the Northern Territory. Everything that happened there. It's a running joke that Australian dramas are set in a cafe. You know why?
Yeah. Well, it's kitchen sink drama, firstly, so there's your budget, just one set.
That's right, and everyone can gather there and all their heartbreaks and successes can be there. And then when we export Mick Dundee's character from Tennant Creek and send him out to the US, there's a romance. And I've thought about this. This is slightly different to other Australian comedies in that there is a romance that generally works. Why does that work? And I've realised it's because Sue doesn't actually love Mick. She loves everything that Mick portrays about being Australian. And it's like we're looking up to the big brother. We want America so dearly to love us, and here's our flaws and our shortcomings, but you don't only forgive us for these shortcomings, you actually embrace us for that.
See, Mick is not the comedian. It's not like American comedy like Jim Carrey where the whole world's a straight man and he's the fool. Mick actually believes that he is a straight man. In all Australian comedies, every character is so overly evolved that they can only function because somebody else is as skewed as they are. But there's generally no pratfall, there's generally no comedian.
And I think that's the reason why it's the straight man against the jokers, which really are authority. It's always an Australian comedy, you've got the battler who's been set upon by society. Let's say Dale Kerrigan in The Castle, a man who loves his dogs and is fighting the expansion of the airport, which is going to take us home.
His love for keeping his world small. You see, Australian comedy isn't about the chancer who actually like Only Fools and Horses, Del Boy, who actually wants to show the world and leap to the next thing.
Yeah, that his town belongs there with Milan in New York.
Australian humour is so small that if you look, for instance, at Jonah from Tonga, when he's in the youth penitentiary centre and he shows his dad on an open day, he's got to share with a bunk bed.
His cell,
right?
yes.
His cell, and there's another person there as well. I don't get my own room unless I've stayed there for 6 months. And then he gets told, well, never mind. Maybe one day. And he goes wistfully, yeah, one day. Like his elevation is not striking out on his own, but just seniority will give him a few more perks in his life.
The simple man, the honest man, is always celebrated. So the film Takeaway, for example, I was watching the other day, where you've got two fast food enterprises in Coburg, which is an ethnic part of Melbourne, competing against each other. One of them comes up with a novel idea of having a dim sim, which is like a Chinese fried dumpling on a stick, and he heralds himself as being, basically advanced. He's almost a prophet, and that he could come up with that idea.
Well, there you go again. Kitchen sink drama that's become commercial kitchen sink drama.
Just
and
about.
That's how high our budgets can go. Mick Dundee doesn't actually come away learning anything. Rather, the Americans have had to accommodate to him. That's the humour of it.
I think, following that through, the small man who's beset upon by authority, similar with Takeaway, in that the two fast food joints decide to unite and find a multinational burger company which comes into their town. So very much like that as well. When we talk about worlds not possibly getting any smaller than a cafe, well, Melbourne's done one better. In fact, we've got ethnocentric humour, things like Acropolis Now, which was set not only in a cafe, but a Greek cafe. I mean, that's really drawing things to the smallest level. Things recently like Housos, for example, where it set ethnic groups in a housing projects.
Your wog's out of work.
Yeah, that sort of style as well. Even going back to things like Nina Colutta's We're a Weird Mob, we had a very famous Graham Kennedy, who was basically crowned as the king of Australian TV and Australian comedy, driving up to Sydney and being asked by the taxi driver if he could drive another 2,000 kilometres north because, well, he simply didn't belong there, and you're a weird mob, you lot from Melbourne.
You've said to me before that Australian humour is really based on asymmetrical relationships.
Yes.
That we don't really have a great mate movie in Australia.
Yeah, I think that's why we don't really have much in the way of road movies. And there was one recently done with Shane Jacobson, who played the fantastic role as Kenny. Now, if you're going to get something from this video, please have a look at Jenny, again an everyday man who saw himself as an events plumber, was decried by his father as simply being a glorified turd burglar, and didn't want to advance beyond this station and take up an administration role. But he did do, in actual fact, a film with Paul Hogan. It was the closest to a mate's movie, although Paul Hogan played his father. The humour didn't really work.
I think the only perfect mate film that we have in Australia is Storm Boy, and that's about a boy and his pelican.
You were saying to me as well, with asymmetric relationships, the closer that we can get, because you'll never have two lead male characters and have that actual bromance properly protect.
You won't have,
apart from maybe you and your stupid mate.
See, Wayne's World worked because the two characters looked out for each other, but Garth clearly adored Wayne, whereas Wayne was it wasn't overly done, but it was an adoration fest all the same. But when you had Demi and Maddie, Demi was only tolerated because Maddie liked Demi's sister, so there was a hope, it can't be too sweet. A relationship in Australia can't be too sweet. If it is just over fawning. It's Mad Max and Mad Max's dog in
Yeah,
the first
Mad Max
movie.
2.
Mad Max 2, the mute Aboriginal and
Yeah.
Mad Max, So it's an asymmetrical relationship, which will always be. And unfortunately, it must be something in Australian society that brings us, with your political prisoners. Muriel eventually gives up
Yeah.
that people will accept her and that she'll be a perfect peer.
Well, you're right in terms of things like political prisoners. I mean, a comedy that's on at the cinemas at the moment is regarding a man who left Australia many years ago, comes back and finds himself in a detention centre. Again, we're going back to small, defined ethnic humour, which is something Australia really does, I think, in its films.
I was wondering what Australia does well and how it can actually become commercial, and what it seems to do well.
Satire, I would say.
But satire doesn't really carry globally.
It doesn't sell outside, yeah.
It's horror. Like your Wolf Creek, Mad Max, yeah. And the Australian larrikin humour and
Babadook.
the intimacy of violence, such as in Chopper, reflects that a bit with Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. So I reckon that's where Australia should push if it actually wants to be something.
And we're never big on the sight gags. You'll never see someone rubber facing like Jim Carrey. You'll never really get much in the way of sight gags, and musicals just don't really happen to be our thing either, unless you're embracing the music that's already pre-recorded. Who would have thought that Priscilla would have done so well on the back of ABBA's music, or for that point even Muriel's Wedding? And Muriel's Wedding's a big favourite of yours too. It's campy.
It's campy. I love when they undo that enormous beanbag zip and it's actually her costume that she's wearing. That's something else.
Folks, if you like what you see, like, subscribe, we'll catch you in the next Soosology, and start watching some Aussie films. If you haven't seen Kenny, Kenny, story about an events plumber. He does outdoor dunnies. Have a look at that, I'm sure you'll like it.
One thing I was going to say, if the Elephant Man was made in an Australian film, he would not be shamefaced at all. He wouldn't be embarrassed. He'd be winding down the window from a taxi and pulling faces at you.
Unabashedly
How do
ugly.
you like that, you mate? That's the whole larrikin spirit of like the Australian prisoner of war under the Japanese. Why would I be ashamed? I'm just here for another day. Hope to see you another day.